Welcome to the Scholar's Chair. We bring to you an interfaith discussion among faith leaders concerning their views on religious liberty as proposed by one of America's founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. Our presenters are Nadav L. Vidal from the Jewish tradition, followed by Dr. Safi Koskos from the Islamic tradition, and Reverend Brian Harrington from the Baptist tradition. But first, a little brief history. The Virginia legislature passed the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom in 1786. To start our discussion, it will be helpful to remember what Jefferson wrote. Well aware that the opinions and belief of men depend not on their own will, but follow involuntarily the evidence proposed to their minds, that Almighty God has created the mind free, and manifests his supreme will that free it should remain by making it altogether insusceptible of restraint, that all attempts to influence it by temporal punishments or burdens or by civil incapacitations tend only to beget habits of hypocrisy and meanness, and are a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion, who, being Lord both of body and mind, yet chose not to propagate it by coercion on either, as was his almighty power to do, but to extend it by its influence on reason alone. And here is our moderator, Miss Tamika Washington.
As he mentioned, my name is Tamika Washington. I'm the founder and president of the Interfaith Coalition of Bowie, and we are so excited to be sponsoring another thoughtful conversation among our interfaith colleagues. And so this topic is rich, and so we will dive right in. Our first speaker is from the Jewish tradition, and is Nadav of Avital. If I mispronounce your name, I'm so sorry.
All right, that's as good as it gets. I'm not ordained as a rabbi, though. I serve as the religious leader for Ohev Zion Synagogue in Martinsville.
Yes.
But I am also, by my main trade, I'm an American history teacher here in Greensboro, North Carolina. So, Mr. Shahid, if you are able to, there it is. Excellent. So you'll forgive me, perhaps, but I am a teacher and I have a little presentation. I thought that would be
Okay.
a little more apropos here. So if you don't mind me with my face on the side here, I'll just talk through some ideas and present, and hopefully this will work in just a moment. All right.
Good.
Just thumbs up if you can see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. I'm a veteran of a year and a half of Zoom teaching. So that is my fallback here. So first of all, just in terms of the timeliness, it's very interesting. Again, Mr. Heed, you when you emailed me last week, I have a whole lesson on Jefferson that I do, although not, I had to learn much about his religious ideas. I have not delved in that so far, but there is an idea of how Jeffersonian was Jefferson. In fact, you alluded to this in your earlier presentation and introduction with his both being a slave master and these ideas of freedom, which are constantly contradictions. So this is one of the assignments that I have for my 11th grade students that we go through. This is part of it. Also, just I think 3 weeks ago, for the first time, I happened to have been in Washington, D.C. with a group of teachers with the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. We were in D.C. looking viewing a few things, but we spent one evening at the Jefferson Memorial, which I thought was very interesting. So we were able to see actually some of the writings actually engraved in the marble at the mausoleum in the Jefferson Memorial. But in any case, to jump into these ideas, Jefferson, again, of being Jeffersonian in some ways, had much of a conflicted life, as we may we'll delve into here, in terms of both of his outward political writings and teachings, and perhaps his personal thoughts. Although he was Anglican by birth, by baptism, marriage, and burial as well, He left a lot of the teachings of the church. We well might know that he was against much of the Christianity part of the theology of the of speaking about Jesus, or the Christliness of Jesus. Here are some of his quotes. I won't read them out loud, but if you want to take a look at some of these ideas, and these are some of his beliefs that he was able to share. In fact, this last one here, it does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods, was part of his election, one of his election speeches in 1800, in the election of 1800, which later on he paid kind of a great deal for it, as many people threw him out as atheist. And he always towed the line between being atheist, what was more commonly known at the time as deist, which I'm sure some other folks will talk about here much. But these are some of his ideas in his writing. But getting in to think about that his own personal ideas may have not always jived with his public or even political writings throughout. So these are some of these. We'll talk about this here. The wall of separation between church and state, which has become a mainstay, of course, of American democracy and the Constitution throughout his writing. Often he speaks about this idea of freedom of opinion. And even in his own university, of course, as you will know, in Virginia, at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, he adamantly opposed, in fact, went to Virginia to try to stop a deacon who was going to teach religion at UVA, and Jefferson opposed any kind of teaching of religion at the university as well. In probably his most famous quoted writing, his public writing, of course, is the Declaration of 76, where he talks about the laws of nature and nature's God, which he borrows those terms, of course, from John Locke and much of the Enlightenment thinkers of the time, endowed by the Creator. Again, he often toes the line between talking about the God of Christ or Christ as God, but he infuses these ideas here too, again, as the supreme judge of the world. Again, talking perhaps about this benevolent creator or some existence. Well, some of the founders were far more religious, certainly than he. He toes the line kind of between these ideas. And of course, he influences, we just spoke about this in the Bill of Rights, in terms of this is Madison's writing, although Jefferson, in his writings back and forth, insisted that this be the very first section of the First Amendment, of course, respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, therefore establishing what we'll talk about, the Establishment Clause of this. When I first was asked to speak about this panel, truly the only Jewish perspective, or the most heralded Jewish perspective that I know of, is this letter from the first president, George Washington, to the Hebrew congregation in Rhode Island.
Oh, yes, I remember.
In which he mentions his not only his desire for Jewish people to be part of it, but he sees here, you can see here, that the United States will give no bigotry, no sanction, to no persecution, to no assistance, requires only that who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving on all occasions to their effectual support. So we see a far more excited, perhaps, taking into the fold not only the Jews of here, in this case, of Newport, Rhode Island, but different sects and religions throughout. Thomas Jefferson here, again, two presidents down the line following Adams, has a very different ideas of Jewish people in general. Before I just put some quotes on the screen, this is in pertaining to Jews. However, it's noteworthy that Jefferson really had a disdain for all religions, all established religions, whether Catholic, even his own Anglican church, which later became the Episcopal Church. So these are some of his ideas. But in terms of the Jewish perspective, you can see here, he continues this Washington's ideas of welcoming all kinds of religions, again, including Jews that he calls out here in person to Virginia, particularly. But also we see this perhaps demeaning view of biblical ideals or Jewish ideas. Again, he references priests of the Old Testament as a bloodthirsty race and remorseless, representing the family of those Abrahamic lineage. But this idea that that Jews do hold some kind of place, although Jefferson did not think necessarily fondly of them. In terms of the Constitution, again, this is while Jefferson didn't quite pen the Constitution, certainly was involved in the discussions thereof. But the Article 6 of the Constitution notes here that no religious tests shall ever be required as a qualification. And then just looking ahead to more modern times, where Jews have been far more accepted into the folds of the United States in some ways, in some ways still maybe not so much. But just to note, in this current Congress that we have, there are 10 Jewish senators and 27 representatives who are Jewish in the American federal democracy, which I think is noteworthy still of that time. And then, of course, we'll see this idea of the bill that we're talking here specifically. This is his original draft in 1779, as Mr. Heed pointed out before. But the opinions of men are not the subject of civil government, nor under its jurisdiction, and then I won't read the rest. But this idea that for whatever religion, I'm looking at the very bottom here, their opinions in the matter of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities. And we see the Jews of the United States, certainly both in practice and in theory, very much welcome this establishment of the freedom of religion, both of establishing both a commonwealth and the later federal religion, and also the exercise thereof. So in terms of in terms of the Jewish perspective, in terms of life, philosophy, and actual practice, it's complicated, right? So that's the general Jewish idea here. So I'm going to offer just a few things here as I kind of wrap up this idea. First of all, throughout American history, we see three kind of distinct periods I just want to mention here. First is indeed in the revolutionary days. Jews did not have a seat in any kind of the congressional committees, necessarily of any cities or any of regions at the time. But they came together. They still stayed in very, very minute communities, but serving purposes for the common good. Another time in American history is the new immigrants, which are the 1870s, 1880s into the turn of the century, where we see a lot of Jewish enclaves. You could think of places like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and so on, near West Side in Chicago. We would see the rise of yeshivas, many Yiddish places, like theaters and cinemas and newspapers that were being surrounded at the time. And then one more place more recently in history is following this idea. In fact, the Bill of Establishment by Jefferson was quoted many times after World War II. So just after the Jewish Holocaust and genocide in Europe, many American Jews feared that many of the Nazi ideas or these possible Holocausts would continue in the name of religion, in this case, in the name of Christianity and Protestantism. And many people advocated both in state cases and federal cases for the reestablishment of this religious freedom to not have Americans pursue some of the Nazi ideas here in the United States. In Israel, just to make that connection also in terms of the Jewish perspective, this is the declaration of the state of Israel in 1948. But you see here this idea of borrowing this idea of natural rights, also perhaps borrowing from Jefferson, borrowing from Locke, this idea of Jews having the rights to have their own assembly. And again, here in the italics, if you see it, by virtue of our natural and historic rights, claiming the land of Israel for Jews. So we see again this idea. It's very complicated, of course, in Israel, and I'm happy to follow that later. Israel is, as a democratic state, has a foundational law of Jews having the right of return. which has come up many times in the 1980s, 90s, and today of who is a Jew, which has been constantly debated, whether Israel too is a democratic state with a separation of church and state. However, there is a connection to Judaism, and how does that play out? And this is a question that governments in Israel are still talking about today. Lastly, I want to talk about in terms of Jefferson. You may know that in Jewish tradition, usually when we talk about streams or denominations of Jews, there are usually three denominations. We talk about the Orthodox, people that are more observant of halachic laws, which are more closely linked to the commandments of the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, and so on. In the late 1800s, a new denomination came trying to reform, to bring the Judaism to more modern times, that hailed from originally in Cincinnati and then spread out to the United States with this idea of modernizing Judaism. And then lastly is a conservative movement, which came to be mostly in the 1920s and 30s, which kind of made the middle ground between the Orthodox and Reform in terms of how to bring modernism into traditional ideas. When I was researching this just a bit, the two streams thinking about Jefferson and this establishment of religion and where I thought he might fall, it's far more likely that he falls into one of these two categories, and I'm happy to talk about some. One is a more Reconstructionist model. This is Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan in the 1920s and 30s, who wanted to take the ideas of Judaism, but far more than even reform, to modernize it to modern life and to have a more spiritual connection rather than more a theological connection to Judaism. And in some ways, perhaps, again, Jefferson, this might be his more public persona of his writing, of being spiritual without necessarily being as theological to his writings. And the last stream, which is a very small sliver of Judaism, but there are some synagogues around the United States of these, is the idea of humanistic Judaism. And that really devoids much of any of the divine or spirituality, which takes the ideas of some traditions and holidays and prayers perhaps, but absent of any kind of mention of God most at all, where people believe in the human experience and the globalness. And for what it's worth, in this discussion, I've taken more time than I expected. But the idea that where does, if we think of Jefferson, I would think he probably lives somewhere between Reconstructionist and humanist, again, depending on his personal beliefs or our beliefs, and so on. So
that's an excellent presentation, and it is very, very thoughtful. I appreciate it very, very much. We're just running out of time. But
okay.
If Tamika, if you were introduced our next presenter.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you again, Nadav. That was a very rich discussion and laid the groundwork for our next presenter, who is no stranger to us, Dr. Safi Kaskas from the Muslim tradition. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. There are indeed some interesting commonalities between Thomas Jefferson's ideas on religious freedom and the teachings of the Quran as they are reflected in the Medina Charter and the covenant of Prophet Muhammad with Christians. So actually, I'm not going to talk about how these ideas are related to the Quran per se, or how similar these ideas are to the Quran, but I'm going to talk about how the Quran was implemented in reality and how these ideas that were expressed by Jefferson coincide with this Islamic document. I'll speak about this topic from three parameters. Number one, religious freedom and tolerance. Number two, separation of religion and state. Number three, universal principles of justice and equality. First point, religious freedom and tolerance. What does the Quran say about it? In verse 2, chapter 2, verse 256, which is widely known, the Quran flatly states that there can be no compulsion in religion. In chapter 10, verse 99, the Quran affirms the principle of religious freedom. It says, addressing Prophet Muhammad and consequently each one of us, had your Lord willed, all the people on earth would have believed, all of them entirely. Is it then up to you, Prophet, to compel people to believe? This is as far as the Quran is concerned. From the Medina Charter, this document created by Prophet Muhammad is the first social contract in history and the first constitution based on the Quran as it was understood by the Prophet. It established a pluralistic society where Muslims, Jews, and other religious groups could coexist peacefully. It emphasized mutual respect and protection of religious freedom. The Quran says, to each of you, we have assigned a law and a way of life. If God had wanted, he could have made you a single community, but instead, he is testing you using what he has revealed to you. So be forward. In other words, compete with all that is good. You will all return to God, and he will clarify these matters about which you have differed. This is chapter 5, verse 48. As far as the covenant with Christians is concerned, these covenants guaranteed the protection of Christian communities, their churches, and their religious practices, ensuring they could practice their faith without fear or persecution. The Quran says, truly those believers in this message, as well as the Jews, the Christians, and the Sabians, whoever believes in God and in the last day and does righteous deeds will have their reward from their Lord and will not have fear, nor will they grieve. Chapter 2, verse 62. Now, let's talk about Jefferson ideas. Jefferson's Virginia status for religious freedom and his broader views on religious liberty were rooted in the belief that individuals should be free to practice their religion without government interference. He explicitly included Muslim, Jews, Christian, and people of all faith in his vision of religious freedom. The second point that I want to talk about is the separation of religion and state. From the Medina Charter point of view, while it established a framework for governance, it also respected the autonomy of different religious communities, allowing them to govern their own affairs according to their beliefs, and always, even in the Quran, referred the Jews to go back to their own Torah rather than go back to Muhammad to ask him what to do about this or that. So the Quran directed them to go back to the Torah that has the judgment of everything they were asking about. In fact, after the constitution was adopted, the name of the town was Yathrib at that time, changed from Yathrib to Medina. The word Medina means in Arabic, a place governed by civil law. Jefferson ideas. Jefferson was a strong advocate for the separation of church and state, believing that government should not impose favor any religion. This principle was crucial for maintaining religious freedom and preventing religious tyranny. The third point I'm going to talk about is universal principles of justice and equality. The Quran says, believers uphold justice and bear witness to God, even if that witness is against yourself, your parents, or your close relatives. Whether a person is rich or poor, God can best take care of both. Refrain from following your own desires so that you do not act unjustly. If you distort the truth, God is fully aware of what you do. This is in chapter 4, verse 135. It also says, God does not forbid you from dealing kindly and equitably with those who did not fight you because of your faith and did not drive you out of your homes. God loves those who are equitable. chapter 60, verse 8. It also says, we have honored the children of Adam. That's all the children of Adam, regardless of what religion they belong to, and favored them to a far greater extent than most of our creation. Chapter 17, verse 70. Medina Charter, it promoted justice and equality among all members of the society, regardless of their religious affiliation. Covenant with Christian, these documents emphasize the fair treatment and protection of Christian communities, reflecting a commitment to justice and equality. Jefferson ideas, Jefferson's writing and policies reflected with belief in universal human rights and equality, principles that were foundational to his vision of a just society. My brother John Andrew Morrow, who wrote in a book and collected all these documents about covenant to the Christians, decided to study the nearly 7,000 titles in Thomas Jefferson's personal library in search of any traces of the covenant of the Prophet Muhammad, namely the Constitution of Medina, the covenant and rights and freedom of the messenger of God that granted to the Christians of the Middle East and the world. The results of this research are remarkable. In addition to the famous copy of the Quran that everyone by now knows that Jefferson owned, the search confirmed that Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the United States of America and its third president, have several of the six now accounts of the covenants of the Prophet in his library collection. This suggests that the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, along with a variety of other sources, may have played a role in the creation of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights. While there is no direct evidence that Jefferson was explicitly influenced by these Islamic documents, the similarities in their principles suggest a shared commitment to religious freedoms, justice, and the separation of religion and state. Jefferson's ownership of the Quran and his interest in various religious traditions indicate that he was open to diverse sources of inspiration. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you, Dr. Safi. Appreciate your insight into this topic. We have one more speaker before we go into our question and answer portion, and that is Reverend Brian Harrington from the Christian Tradition. Reverend Harrington?
Hello, and thank you all so much for welcoming me back to your interfaith discussions, and I'm thrilled to be here today to share a few thoughts. So, as a Baptist Christian, which I guess I still claim that I am, it is impossible for me to separate the particularly Baptist part of my identity from my understanding of religious liberty, because despite current day messages and actions to the contrary by people who call themselves Baptists, our forebears were committed above almost all else to the principle of religious liberty. Consider, for instance, the Baptist Christians who lived in Virginia contemporaneously with Thomas Jefferson, who were jailed for up to 5 months for, quote, disturbing the peace, for preaching outside of the established Church of England in the colony. For 10 years, from 1768 to 1778, Baptists were arrested for preaching and also for allegations of child abuse for refusing to baptize infants. And the marriages that were officiated by Baptist ministers were not recognized. And all of this was in the decade that included Jefferson penning this proposed religious liberty law that the Virginia legislature at first and for, I guess, about 10 years, voted down. Of course, all of this in Virginia was nearly a century and a half after the first Baptist in America, Roger Williams, founded what became Rhode Island as a colony for religious liberty, where people of all different faiths or no faith were welcome to live together. He was quoted as saying that forced religion stinks in God's nostrils, which always reminds me of the Quranic passage that there is no compulsion in religion. And he lived out that conviction by creating a place where people had freedom to exercise their religious conscience without any government interference. And from the beginning of the Baptist movement, another century earlier, an important implication of the move to believers' baptism as opposed to infant baptism was that since Baptist children would not be baptized into the Church of England or similar state-sanctioned Lutheran or Roman Catholic churches, for Baptists, church membership and citizenship in a particular state was divorced. Separation of church and state was therefore a founding principle. Of course, we contrast that with today's evangelical Christians, many of them Baptist, who actively support religious displays like the Ten Commandments in schools, who use government funding to pay for religious schools, and who pervert the freedom of religion into a freedom to use religion as a rationale for legal discrimination, especially against women and members of the LGBTQ plus community. They continue to strive toward creating a de facto establishment of evangelical Christianity as the state religion. Therefore, I am so thankful for this timely conversation today, in which we can recall Thomas Jefferson's assertion that the rights of religious liberty, quote, are of the natural rights of humankind. Fundamental rights that give each person the freedom to follow their conscience without compulsion from the state or any other person. Tragically, our history in this country teaches us that when Christianity is the de facto state religion, the people whom Jesus termed the least of these who are members of God's family, namely the poor and the oppressed, suffer and die. When religious liberty suffers, Black people suffer, Indigenous people suffer, other persons of color suffer. When religious liberty languishes, the health and well-being of women languishes. When religious liberty wanes, the safety of the LGBTQ plus community wanes. When religious liberty dies, real human people who I believe are the beloved children of God, they die. But by no means does this mean that we, as people of faith, should not allow our most deeply held beliefs to speak to our government in our political arena. Of course, we should be inspired by the prophets who dreamed of a world in which justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Of course, we should be buoyed in knowing that when any of us feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and house the unsheltered, we are doing the holiest of work. Of course, our faith should lead us to fight for what is right, to demand that our government take care of everyone, not just the rich and the powerful. Of course, religion is political, but we speak and we act with humility, fighting for the right while acknowledging that we may not have the fullness of truth, knowing that we err if we try to impose our ways, remembering that we need each other's wisdom. We need each other's truth. We need each other's light, because only together may we realize a nation and a world where everyone can thrive, where we can all, at last, truly be able to say, free at last.
Well, good.
Reverend Harrington, what a powerful way to close out this portion of the discussion. And it really brought home to what religious liberty looks like today and the impact of it on our lives. I'll turn it back over to Khalil, and then if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll bring them up for discussion. Khalil, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Washington. I wanted to just follow up with the idea that God created the mind free, and the idea that this freedom should remain because God created it, and at the same time, it flies in the face of the historical struggle for freedom, and in not only religious sense, but in a human, in just a general human sense. Even while Jefferson was writing these words, human beings were struggling for greater freedom. How do you how do you reconcile the idea of freedom and the common existence that we find human societies struggling? I just want to pass that through. Let's start at the top from the Jewish presenter.
The idea of, you're talking about the idea of freedom.
Yeah, the religious freedom is a great idea, but it seems, and of course, in Jefferson's view, that God created humanity free, and yet in the face of those writings, human beings have struggled for freedom, including religious freedom. Even while he was writing this material, Europe is fighting tooth and nail for religious dominance. So, and this happens in all religions, not only in Christianity, but in all of them. So, what is your view from a Jewish perspective?
I would think I would rely on the idea that we are given free will, where and again, different streams and interpretations might interpret it differently, where God might know is omnipresent and omnipotent. We are up to our own devices, perhaps guided by religion, but people do have free will. In terms of religion, in terms of government of the time and choices, I'm blanking right now on the author of it, but if men were angels, there would be no need for government. I want to fact check me on that. I forget who it is.
Yeah.
But in any case, we have these ideals, and certainly within the various traditions that we have here, we have ideals that our tradition tells us, our books tells us, our prophets tell us, and then we are left to our own devices. So while the ideal, of course, of freedom for all has been fought for, in the United States now for the past 248 years by different constituents, and by the founders themselves, of course, rebelling against England at the time for their own freedom, and then taking away other freedoms consequently. So, our tradition strives for certainly freedom for all, but we are left to our own devices. So I don't know if that's it's a bit of a cop out of free will, but we have
it's a good. It's a good one. It's a good explanation. Martha, I'll get you in this conversation. What are your thoughts? Martha, you're muted. That's unusual. Martha is muted. Okay, let's see.
Okay. All right. Well, not that really gave me time to get my thoughts together, because they're just very scattered at this point.
Sure.
And part of what has scattered them has been, and I really appreciate what Reverend Harrington had to say. And it has given me the courage to share something on Facebook that I was it was a little out there, and I thought maybe it will offend some people. Maybe I shouldn't put it out there. And yet I think I will, because it's so apropos of our political system right at the moment. But that being said, Brian, your statement about religion is political, and the juxtaposition of that with the idea of separation of church and state, I feel like I'm trying to square a circle here. So do you have any words of wisdom that would help with that?
Yeah. Do you want me to go ahead and jump in?
Go ahead, please help me here.
Okay. No, I think that's a really good question. But I mean, I guess it's a question that I keep trying to figure out how to live out in my life right now. Because well, for lots of different reasons, but I mean, some of you may know that I was a pastor, solo pastor and co-pastor for 13 years, and I'm not doing that right now. And I mean, part of the reason that that I'm not doing that right now could be said to be that I was, quote unquote, too political in what I was preaching about. And I'll throw my wife under the bus too. She was preaching right along with me as my co-pastor. But I think that religion absolutely is political, because well, I guess the way that one of my professors talks about it, dear friend Angela Kauser, is that that two people getting together for coffee is politics, because it's two people who are trying to navigate how to live in this world together. And so, I mean, by that kind of definition, everything that we do is political in some ways. So I guess the way that I square that circle, or however you say, is that that we need to say what is important to us. We need to use our faith, not use our faith, but be led by our faith, to say things that are important. We need to be led by our faith to do things that are important. And I guess I'd go to sort of part of the ending of my thing, of that. What that means is, I would love for everybody else to believe exactly the same way that I do, but I need to have the humility of knowing that I don't have the fullness of truth. I don't know everything. I mean, none of us do. I mean, often reminded of a transgender Baptist minister who went to the Southern Baptist Convention and sat down with a group of men who didn't even think that she should be allowed to be a person, much less a minister. And when she reflected on that, she said that there was some part of the gospel that they had that I didn't have. And I mean, that was 10 years ago that I heard that, and I continue to be struck by that humility, that there's some bit of truth that even the people we disagree with, maybe the people that don't even fully recognize our humanity, that there is some kind of truth that they have that I don't have. And so the way that I guess I think that works out in the world is that we have to work together to try to be able to hear each other's wisdom and see each other's light. So that means I can't impose my way of doing things on everybody else. And so I need everybody else to be able to have their freedom to worship in the ways that they want, to learn and study in the ways that they want, so that we can all come together and hopefully create the kind of world that we all hope for. Does that make any sense?
It makes excellent sense. And what inspires me is the notion that is from the Quran that says that truth and justice are manifestations of the divine will, which means that we have the ability, human beings have the ability to know what it is. We know what the truth is, even if it comes at you in Arabic or Hebrew, if we can understand it, or comes from that tradition, if we can understand it to be true. And this is coming, I'm coming from the Islamic perspective, because there is one God, and all the prophets said that there was one God, all of them. Then this brings humanity to a place of unity. Our object of existence is the one God. And I think it has meaning, when his will is manifest in our being and our understanding of the world in truth and in justice, we have the ability to recognize that. I think that's a very important concept. I think it brings us together in a positive construct, rather than perhaps saying, which I say all the time, I don't have the possession of all truth and knowledge. You know what I mean? Professor.
Khalil, hold on one second, because
Go
Martha
ahead.
has a question for the
Oh,
group.
go ahead, Martha. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go right ahead. She's muted again.
And then, I didn't want people to hear me blowing my nose. My allergies continue to aggravate me. But, what you were just saying, Khalil, and what Brian was saying about humility, there's a meditation in one of the old Jewish prayer books on doubt. And it refers to doubt as the acid that eats away the false. And I have always loved that way of looking at, what my beliefs are, and hoping that other people look at their beliefs in the same way, that what rings true for me may not ring true for someone else. And I think about that in many ways, in personalities, introverts versus extroverts, people who learn differently, who are dyslexic or, whatever, that, again, if we could sort of bring our strengths and our weaknesses together, we might be able to figure out a better world than the one that we are experiencing right at the moment. And I remain hopeful.
Just a quick question for everyone. If someone, like some of our Martha Taylor, some of our political leaders would say that this is a Christian country, and everybody else is just kind of guest here. Uh, what do we do as a collective to help her accept the diversity of the country? I just put it out there, Professor Cascas.
Actually, Brother Khalil, I want to answer your first question because it's a fundamental question about personal freedom.
Yes, sir.
I mean, and I'm going to drag everybody with me to the beginning, to the very beginning, the day God decided to create Adam, because that's where the whole story starts. On that day, God, according to the Quran, God told the angels, when I create him and I give him the shape that I want to give him, turn him into a human being, and breathe some of my spirit into him, you all bow down to him. They said, why would you create somebody that will spill blood and kill other people? He said, I know what you don't know. Following that verse in the Quran, immediately we have God who created Adam, taught him the name of everything. The word taught him the name of everything, as far as I'm concerned, tells me that Adam was different from all previous Homo sapiens by being teachable, by being able to think, to retain information, and to use intellect. Because God told the angels, tell me the name of these things. They say, we only know what you taught us. All power be to you. He said, Adam, tell them the name of these things. And Adam did. They realized that Adam is more superior in his nature to theirs. So they bowed down to him, except Iblis, Satan, who said, I will not bow to him because you created me from fire and created him from dirt. In a sense, I realized at that time that God can create other creature from other, we are hydrogen-based and he is oxygen-based. So anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is the famous story about God giving Adam a program, which we call innate nature. But that's a program. Part of that program is to teach us to choose freely. But Adam had no chance to use his freedom of choice when he was with God. Whatever God was telling him, he was doing. And God wanted to send him down to earth, but he wanted him to realize he had the freedom to choose. So he said, Adam, you and your wife can eat from anywhere in this garden except this tree. Could have been any tree. Just wanted to teach him to exercise his freedom to choose. To make the long story short, the fact that Adam ate out of the tree or chose to eat out of the tree is confirmation to the program to choose freely. So in the Quran, we have evidence of how that freedom to choose was developed as part of the initial program that God gave Adam to prepare him to go down to earth. Anyway, that program also has another aspect. When we do something that's wrong, we realize that we made the wrong choice. So in the Quran, immediately after Adam made the wrong choice, he asked God, what should I do now? God taught him to repent and taught him a prayer to seek repentance and forgave him. No original sin in the Quran. The original sin, if any, belonged to Satan, which is arrogance. He refused to bow down. I think that whole scenario set our thoughts about who we are back on our feet instead of our head. We don't have a fallen nature, we have a perfect nature. Its perfection manifests itself by the fact that we can choose freely, we can make mistakes, but we know how to ask for repentance and pray for forgiveness. And God told us that he is ready to forgive all sins except the one sin of making partners with him or worshiping more than one God with him. So basically, we're perfect creation because my God only create first. He never creates seconds. So human beings are here with a basic freedom will that should be respected. Anywhere I'm talking to you, and I need to say this to all the Muslims around the world who need to also accept all of this. Because if I go to some Muslim countries, freedom is oppressed. People are oppressed. They're not free to choose. And in the United States, we're very lucky because this is a constitutional right. And we need to defend it. We're about to lose it if we don't defend it. So this is basically it. So I believe that the freedom to choose is it's part of our innate nature. It's right to every human being, regardless of color, gender, whatever. If you're a human being, you have that right, as far as I'm concerned. And lucky me, that's what the Constitution confirmed. And I'm very glad. I'm not here to judge Jefferson or to evaluate him, but I'm very happy that he had the courage to propose this, and as a consequence, now we have it as part of our Constitution, Bill of Rights. So, thank you.
Professor Cascas, that's a good way of ending our discussion, actually. But I wanted to give the floor an opportunity if they wish to just go further. We're at 4 o'clock right now, but I don't want for the last word to be a Muslim last word necessarily by my will. I want to see if there are any other
I also love Jesus and I love Moses.
by the grace of Allah. Is there any other questions and concerns that you'd like to bring up?
I'd like to add something, Khalil.
Yeah.
And just hearing this conversation, right, and our understanding that religion has never lived up to its ideal, right? It has always been flawed. And even now, when you look at the religious hour, which traditionally in America is Sunday at 11, right? It's the most segregated hour of the week, right? And women in any faith tradition operate from a position of less. So the idea of religion and the implementation of religion there's always been a huge gap. What gives me hope is that we have these conversations, we tell these truths, because telling the truths is the only way we get to a point where we acknowledge what's happening and we begin to correct it. And so this conversation has been very helpful for me, and I hope for many others.
Excellent.
Thank you.
It's 4 o'clock. That is perfect, Ms. Washington. Everyone have a great Sunday. And thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you.